be a screw, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the fifth part of, What If Issei, Rias Enter Solo Leveling. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of YagamiNguyen on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Your form is full of openings, Issei-senpai, Kaneko said emotionlessly as she ducked her head and threw a punch into his gut, causing Issei to grimace and stumble back, his breath escaping in a sharp hiss. Around noon, Issei had turned his attention to learning hand-to-hand combat from Kaneko. Because Kaneko moved much slower than him, Issei had to force himself to slow down to match her pace during their sparring session. Despite perceiving her movements in almost slow motion, he recognized the value in her close combat techniques. These techniques could definitely be used to hone his own skills, especially for dealing with non-monster opponents whose attacks would be more calculated and less driven by raw, primal instinct. Widen your stance a bit more so enemies won't catch you off balance. Kaneko said as she adjusted his stance, grabbing his knee and moving it out with Issei moving his form awkwardly to her instruction, and when you hit, try to put more weight into your strikes. Your power should come from your whole body, not just your arms. Alright. Issei nodded as he threw a punch, making Kaneko nod in approval just as Kiba returned with the two training dummies that Kaneko had requested him to make for Issei to train with, setting it up in the middle of the courtyard. Both dummies were equipped with several spinning wooden arms, each set to rotate at different speeds and angles. Kaneko demonstrated the training exercise by hitting an arm with her palm and simultaneously defending herself from another of the same level using her elbow. I cannot keep up with your speed, so these dummies will help you practice your reaction time and defensive skills, senpai. The harder you hit the arms, the faster the other will spin and hit you back. You will need to stay alert and react quickly. And don't worry about breaking them, Issei-kun. Kiba spoke to him with a smile. I have reinforced the joints of these dummies with steel so it will last for a while. Notice, quest received. Master the basics too. Complete the exercise by hitting the spinning arms of the training dummies while successful evading or block the others. Land 50 hits without getting hit 5 times. Hit landed, 0 out of 100. Hit taken, 0 out of 5. Reward, 100,000 EXP. Note, the counters will reset if the player is hit more than 5 times. Stand between the dummies, senpai. Issei positioned himself between the two training dummies just as he had been instructed by Kaneko, preparing himself for a long exercise and an even longer quest. As soon as he struck one of the spinning arms, another arm immediately rotated toward him from the opposite direction. Issei managed to block it, but the slight shift in his stance triggered the other arms. Within moments, several of them landed solid blows on his waist, hips, and thighs, causing the counter to reset almost instantly. Ouch! The moment you panic is the moment you will be hit hard, senpai. This exercise is meant to use your own strength and speed against you. Kaneko stated emotionlessly, and just as she said that another arm swung toward Issei from the front, catching him square in the face and knocking him flat on his back. A worried Asia immediately tried to rush to his side to heal him, but Issei held out his hand to stop her as he slowly got back on his feet to try again. And again. For the next hour, Issei relentlessly trained, each reset of the counters only fueling his determination. His body started to ache from the repeated hits, and sweat drenched his clothes, but he refused to give up. His persistence started to show results as he gradually improved, dodging and blocking more effectively with each attempt. Eventually, Aquino and Rias appeared with the crimson-haired heiress calling out for her servants. "Everyone, lunch is ready." Taking a deep breath, Issei nodded and walked with Asia over to the table, where the others soon joined them. He collapsed into his chair, receiving a bowl of rice from Aquino with a grateful bow and immediately dug in with a pair of chopsticks, devouring his food in record time while the others watched him curiously. "Can I have another, Aquino-san?" he asked, holding out his empty bowl out with a sheepish grin. Aquino giggled softly as she took his bowl to refill it from the rice cooker. "Of course, Issei-kun. You've certainly earned it with all that training." As Aquino handed him a second serving, Rias tilted her head with a small smile. "You're really pushing yourself, I see. Planning to get right back to training after lunch?" Issei just nodded, already halfway through his second bowl. "Here, have another, Issei-kun," Aquino said as she handed Issei another bowl of rice, which she already filled with an abundance of meat and fried egg that she got from the dishes on the table. "Anyway, did you know we have a hot spring?" "I'm done. Thank you for the meal," Issei declared, interrupting Aquino before she could finish telling him about the hot spring at the back of the villa as he put his empty bowl down, thanking her and Rias for the amazing lunch with both hands clasping together before getting up and rushing right back to the two training dummies. Soon, Rias and the rest of the peerage could hear the familiar sounds of wooden arms clashing and spinning, punctuated by the thuds whenever Issei got hit. "Oh wow, not bad at all, Issei-kun," Aquino said with a surprised smile, her eyes sparkling with amusement as she observed the basketball-sized orb of magic power that Issei had managed to conjure between his palms. Though larger, it fluctuated with a slight instability compared to the smaller, softball-sized orb Asia was managing between her palms, though it appeared much more stable. Being a bishop, Asia was doing quite well in the magical training they were having under Aquino, who was undoubtedly the best in the peerage at magic, next to Rias. Surprisingly enough, this seemed to be the training where Issei was finding the most success. The system made it easy for him to use magic and cast spells, as the mana or demonic power required had already been registered and fixed. While he was training to have better control over his magical energy, he didn't really need to do it since the system automatically adjusted and exhausted the exact amount of magical power needed for each spell the moment he decided to use them. It certainly made spellcasting much easier and more straightforward for him. However, practicing control to perfection was still situationally important, since some spells increased its power based on the amount of energy he channeled into them beyond the required amount. Too much energy could result in devastating destructiveness, while too little might render the spell ineffective. Perfecting his control would certainly allow him to harness the full potential of his spells without the risk of unintended consequences. "It's nice to see you focusing on your training, Issei-kun, but I hope you haven't forgotten about the concert this Sunday." "Of course, Aquino-san," Issei replied with a grin while Asia pouted. "Now that you mention it, isn't the concert scheduled for the evening a day after the match as well?" "That's right." Aquino beamed. "So let's give it our best and win so we can enjoy the music with no regrets, yes?" "Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it already." Issei nodded enthusiastically, feeling an extra boost of motivation to train even harder. "Good. Let us get right back to it then." And with that, Issei continued his training, finding the next 3 days falling into a demanding but rewarding routine. He spent his mornings with Kiba and Kaneko, diligently working on the fundamentals of swordsmanship and hand-to-hand combat. In the afternoons, Issei focused on magical training with Aquino and Asia, working on controlling his magical energy better and learning new spells, particularly fire-based ones, given their synergy with his pact with Drake. Despite this, he knew that these spells might not be very useful against the Phoenix Peerage and their master, as they were known to use fire spells, with Riser wielding the flame of the Phoenix itself. Additionally, Issei also dedicated his time honing his strength and stamina with Rias helping him, running up and down the mountain with a boulder strapped to his back. The exercise was undoubtedly more challenging than his usual workouts, but Issei didn't complain as it significantly improved his strength, stamina, and endurance. Moreover, once he reached the top of the mountain he would get to sit all alone with his appealing master, who told him stories about her life before moving to Kuo while he savored the delicious snacks she had prepared for him. It was on the night of the third day that Issei finally got the chance to look at his status window. While he knew he needed to train more, it was clear his efforts had been paying off. His HP and MP had increased significantly now that they also scaled respectively on his STR and Char thanks to his Dragon's Might passive. The EXP that he got from the training quest Chain Master the basics had leveled him up a total of 6 times, with Issei allocating 4 levels to his Dragonsworn main class and 2 levels to his Shadow Monarch subclass. While his Dragonsworn class did not grant any new abilities, Issei suspected that new abilities might be unlocked through increasing his pact levels rather than his class level. On the other hand, the maximum capacity of shadows that he could extract had increased, looking to rise by 10 for each level he invested in Shadow Monarch. This would let him add more shadows to his ranks without having to drop any of the Shadow Wolves unless he had to for stronger shadow when the lineup was full. Good leveling today, partner. I'm sure you'll soon be able to take the Phoenix on yourself. Issei heard Drake say in his mind while he took a swig from the bottle of water in his hand while standing in the kitchen of the villa. It was 10 in the evening, and Issei had just finished a late jog up and down the mountain by himself. It wasn't anything too strenuous, but it helped him unwind after a day of hard work. Thanks, Drake. Issei said with a chuckle, feeling a bit more at ease. He didn't need to check his levels and stats to confirm that he had become even stronger than before. While Issei didn't want to get ahead of himself and believe that he could defeat Razor in a straight-up duel, knowing that the Phoenix had to be around or even above Rias in level with likely much higher stats, Issei had no doubt that he could at least fight him on equal footing if he kept training hard for the next 4 days. If only he could have taken a peek at Razor and his peerage with Observe, then he would be able to gauge their capabilities better. Grafia being around had been too dangerous for him to risk it. Still, that was far from his main concern at the moment. He had been getting stronger. Great. Asia had also gotten better at controlling her magical energy, allowing her to use the healing power of her sacred gear without exhausting any more than she needed to. Despite not being able to fight, her healing ability made her the most valuable asset of the peerage. And that's amazing. But what about everyone else? Issei. Before he could discuss it with Drake, a familiar feminine voice caught his attention. Issei turned to see his master standing in the hallway in a pink nightgown, which hinted at the amazing curves of her voluptuous body, leaving him captivated, but Issei quickly shook it off before Rias could notice him staring. Bucho. What are you doing here at this hour? You should get some sleep, Issei said, noticing the stack of files and documents she was holding in the pair of glasses she was wearing. It was his first time seeing his master with glasses, and it certainly added an exotic touch to her already captivating charm. I decided to do a bit more research on the Phoenix. The crimson-haired girl answered with a smile. Wanna come sit with me? I can certainly use your company. If you insist. Issei smiled and joined Rias in the living room. Before the two settled into their seats, Issei stated, I didn't know you wore glasses, Bucho. Rias replied with a smile while adjusting her glasses, well, I just find that wearing glasses helps me think better sometimes. My vision is actually fine. Ah. Issei nodded before glancing at one of the files Rias had laid out on the table. So, what have you been able to learn so far about the Phoenix, Bucho? Mostly information about their previous matches and the strength each member of their peerage possesses, Rias replied, crossing her arms under her melons. However, understanding them is only part of the problem. How so? Issei asked, intrigued. Because our opponent is the Phoenix. Rias explained, her expression serious. Outside of their abilities to control powerful flame that can burn anything to ashes, the members of the household are also known for their immortality, which gave them second-to-none regenerative ability. Simply put, they cannot die. Even if you decapitate them, it will only take a few seconds for them to regrow their heads. Oh wow. In addition, Razor himself is an exceptionally powerful devil, Rias continued as Issei read the file in his hand. His power has always been considered top-notch. Since he cannot die or be mortally injured, the only way for us to defeat him and his peerage in a raiding game is to force him to forfeit. But that won't be easy. We'll need to throw everything we have at him to somehow overwhelm his regeneration or crush his spirit. What about his sister? We won't have to worry much about Ravel. I heard that she was added to the peerage to learn. It's highly unlikely that she will partake in the main confrontation. Issei nodded his head in understanding as Rias held out the picture of a woman who wore a mask on the right side of her face. This is Isabella, one of Riser's rooks. She's in charge of protecting Ravel, so chances are we'll have 2 fewer opponents to deal with. Right. Regardless, outside of being an unkillable flamethrower. Issei let out a soft laugh as Rias continued. Razor is also a tactical genius when it comes to the raiding game. He has a record of 9 wins and 4 losses, but he threw 2 of them on purpose out of respect for the households his family was close to. It's not that I don't believe we can win, but this whole ordeal seems to have been planned from the start to force me into compliance with the marriage. Rias finished with a tone of resignation, making Issei soften his gaze. Say, Bucho. Issei started slowly. Why do you oppose this marriage so much? Not about marrying that Phoenix guy particularly, 'cause we both know he's a douchebag, but if I'm not mistaken, you seem to oppose the idea of arranged marriage. Why is that? Rias remained silent for a second before she answered. It's because I'm a gremmery. Oh. Issei acknowledged, and Rias didn't need him to tell her that he understood what she meant. I'm proud of being a gremmery, and I'm more than happy to carry the name of my household with pride. It's just. Rias shifted her gaze to the night sky outside the window. Everyone just sees me as Rias of the gremmery household. That's why I decided to come here to live in the human world. It's so refreshing to be seen as just Rias, and not as the heiress of the gremmery household from the 72 Pillars or even the little sister of the current Lucifer. Razor only sees me as a trophy to be obtained and to help with his ambition of carrying the bloodlines into the future. I don't want that. I want to be with someone who sees me for who I truly am. That's all I've ever wanted. You know, Bucho. Issei chuckled softly as Rias turned back to him, noticing the grin on his face while he scratched the back of his head. I think you're the best when you're just being you. For what it's worth, know that to me, you're Rias Gremmery, the prettiest girl at our school, and the best club president I could ever ask for. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Issei. Rias whispered softly as she looked at her pawn, feeling her cheeks heat up at his compliment before finding herself nodding her head to him with a warm smile of her own. Thank you. After that, the 2 of them continued their discussion and reading the files for half an hour before Issei decided to excuse himself to take a shower, as it was getting really late for one. By the time he returned, however, Rias had fallen asleep on the couch, her glasses resting on the table before her. She looked peaceful, a soft smile playing on her lips as she slept with her head resting on one hand. Smiling, Issei quietly went to search for a blanket, finding one in one of the spare rooms on the 2nd floor. Returning to Rias, he draped it gently over her sleeping form, adjusting it carefully to avoid disturbing her rest while ensuring that she was comfortable. With a final glance to make sure everything was in place, Issei left the living room and made his way outside instead of his room. Partner. I need to make sure we will win, Drake, Issei said as he reached into his inventory and pulled out his jacket alongside a gold key. This key, which he had found from the loot box reward of the daily quest that morning, would open a B-rank instance dungeon, undoubtedly with the most difficult challenges and enemies he had faced yet. But he was ready. Do what you must, partner. You know I'm with you. Thanks, Drake. Smiling, Issei made his way into the forest, finding a secluded clearing well away from the villa after a short walk. The only sounds were the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant chirping of nocturnal creatures breaking the silence of the night. Without further ado, Issei held the key out in front him and turned it like opening a lock, causing a faint hum to fill air around him. After a moment, a swirling mass of energy started to form before him, gradually taking shape until it became a portal leading into the instant's dungeon. As Issei stepped through the swirling portal, he found himself in a wide, dimly lit hallway. The walls were lined with towering stone pillars, while the floor beneath his feet was cold, broken marble that looked like it was front an ancient castle that had been long abandoned. The only sources of light were the flickering torches mounted along the walls, casting shadows that danced across the walls and ceiling. As Issei took in his surroundings, he soon heard the distant sound of metal clanking, an unignorable sign that the monsters of the dungeon were approaching him. Cautiously making his way down the hallway, the sound grew louder, reverberating off the stone walls. It was after he rounded a corner and arrived at what looked to be an entrance hall that Issei came face to face with the formidable sight of at least 20 knights marching toward him in a tight formation. At first glance, they appeared to be humanoid warriors clad in dark armor, reminiscent of the Black Shield Knights Issei had fought in his second instance dungeon. However, their armor had a distinctly different design, featuring a mechanical, almost futuristic style that set them apart from anything he had encountered before. The chest pieces, boots, and gauntlets, which had robotic-like joints, were a dull, metallic black with sharp edges and spikes jutting out at various points. Each knight's helmet was adorned with a glowing red visor that pulsed ominously, their faces concealed behind menacing skull-like masks. Their weapons were equally striking. Half the knights wielded massive battle axes with jagged, crude blades, while the other half carried in their hands broadswords with edges that glimmered in the orange glow from the wall-mounted torches. The synchronized clanking of their armored steps created a rhythmic echo as they advanced, their perfectly coordinated marching and imposing figures creating an overwhelming presence, intimidating Issei and making him feel suffocated. Magitech Axeman LV 29. Magitech Swordsman LV 29. More armored monsters. Issei murmured before smirking, summoning boosted gear before reaching his hand into his inventory to pull out a longsword that he had bought a few days ago and point it at the Magitech Knights as they came to a halt at a distance while facing him. Good thing I came prepared. Ironbane Longsword LV 10. Rarity, B. Category, Longsword. ATK 180. Description: a long sword that excelled in piercing through the strongest of defense and delivering devastating damage to fortified enemies with its reinforced blade. Iron Bane inflicts 35% more damage to enemy targets with heavy armors. The Iron Bane longsword, combined with the benefit of his shield breaker title and the penetrate ability if needed, should make quick work of these Magitech Knights. Moreover, despite the fact that there were at least 20 of them and only one of him, Issei was far from outnumbered. "You boys ready for your first battle with me?" Issei asked, and he could hear his shadow wolves howling in response from his shadow. "All right. Issei." For the second time that night, Issei heard his name being called, causing him to turn around, this time in shock. His eyes widened in bewilderment when he saw Rias, dressed in her dark red tracksuit, appearing from around a corner. Her expression mirrored his as she took in the sight of him, and then at the group of Magitech Knights he was about to fight. In her hand was a device emitting a beeping sound similar to a dosimeter, making it clear to Issei that Rias had used it to find him, or to be more precise, the gate she believed he was raiding. Women and their intuition. Since time moved faster inside instance dungeons, another trait that it shared with Gates, there's no telling how long she had been out looking for him outside, but he really should have moved a bit further away from the villa. Then again, she could just fly around the mountain with that dosimeter until she caught a signal. Notice, party feature unlocked. Note: 1. The player might share their EXP with party members depending on their contribution. 2. Party members will be visible on the map, allowing the player to track their positions. 3. Party members can be revived if they get knocked out in battle, provided the player survives and has sufficient resources. 4. The player can track the conditions and stats of their party members in real time. 5. All system functions will not be seen by the party members. Accept Rias Gremory to your party. Y/N. But Issei barely paid any attention to the notification window that flashed before his eyes. The familiar white text blurred into the background, being overshadowed by the sight of Rias as she turned her gaze back to him. "Bucho, what are you doing here?" Finally, he managed to ask as he turned fully around to face her. "This place is dangerous, you should not be." "I could tell you the same thing," Rias said. Before Issei could respond, Rias widened her eyes in shock and cried out to him, "Issei, watch out." In an instant, Issei spun around and swung his blade upward, intercepting the downward strike of a Magitech swordsman. The force of the impact reverberated through his arms, as the sudden clash of steel on steel sent sparks flying. The armored swordsman pushed down with surprising strength, its mechanical joints hissing as it tried to overpower him, but Issei did not have any trouble standing his ground. As the other Magitech knights closed in on him, moving with surprised quickness and coordination despite their armored body and robot-like joints, Issei twisted his blade and forced the swordsman he was facing aside with a practiced motion, throwing it off balance. Dodging an axe that swung at him from the opposite direction, Issei slashed his sword horizontally at the first swordsman, severing its upper body from the lower half with a shower of sparks. The knight's red visor flickered and dimmed as it collapsed into a heap of metal on the ground. Magitech swordsman LV-29, defeated. 5 more Magitech knights closed in on him, 2 swordsmen and 3 axemen, their presences dwarfed over his as they attacked him with their weapons. Issei took a quick step back, narrowly avoiding the swings of the massive battle axes. The weapons crashed into the stone floor where he had just stood, sending shards of stone flying in all directions. The next swordsman lunged at him with surprising speed, its long sword aimed directly at his chest. Issei dove to the side to avoid the attack and countered with a swift slash to its midsection, the ironbane longsword slicing through the armored plating with ease. The knight staggered as sparks flew from the cut, but Issei didn't give it a chance to recover, following up his sword slash with a powerful hook with boosted gear that sent the knight crashing into a wall with its helmet shattered, its body crumpling under the impact. Magitech swordsman LV-29, defeated. Another knight rushed at him from the side, its battle axe raised high. Issei braced himself to dodge, but the axeman never got the chance to strike. A black orb, swirling with a crimson aura, slammed into the knight, blowing apart half of its torso. Issei turned his head around momentarily to see Rias standing just a few paces away, her left arm, with palm facing forward, still outstretched. The immense aura of demonic power that surrounded her made it clear that she was ready to fight with him. Magitech Axeman LV-29, defeated. Notice, no EXP gained. Accept Rias Gremory to your party. Y/N. Once again, the notification was ignored, as Issei widened his eyes in alarm as the space next to his master seemed to distort. Rias seemed to have noticed it too, turning her head just in time to see a knight, sleek and deadly, with a short sword in each hand that was perfect for assassination, materializing out of thin air. Without even a moment of hesitation, Issei acted, swiftly hurling his longsword toward the knight. The blade pierced through the air with deadly accuracy, impaling through the knight's torso just as it lunged toward Rias. The force of the throw pulled the knight with the sword as it embedded the assassin against the wall with a loud thud. Rias gasped, her eyes wide as she realized how close she had come to being struck down. She turned to Issei, a mix of shock and gratitude in her expression as the lifeless knight slumped against the wall, its limbs twitching for a moment before falling. Magitech Assassins LV-28, defeated. Before the two could say anything to each other, Issei noticed more silhouettes flickering at the edges of his vision, realizing that more Magitech assassins were sneaking him and Rias, with their camouflage allowing them to blend almost seamlessly with their surroundings, making them nearly invisible. Issei wasted no time to rush to her side to help her, but a group of axemen instantly blocked his path and swung their weapons at him. Issei managed to dodge the first swing, but the other axemen quickly overwhelmed him. Two of them struck him hard with an overhead blow, forcing him to one knee as he used boosted gear to block. Struggling to rise while the axemen pressed him down, he glanced up to see Rias fighting for her life. She managed to kill two assassins with her power of destruction, but at the same time, she could only narrowly avoid their blades to prevent her throat from being slit. Rias seemed to perceive the camouflaged assassins far better than he could, evidently from the way she could see them before they made their moves against her, but since she was a mage and not a fighter like him, assassins were undoubtedly her worst matchup. Without any other choice, Issei roared. Lycaon. With a feral snarl, Lycaon leaped out of his shadow and charged at the Magitech assassins with terrifying speed, tearing through the other knight standing between him and Rias as it reached her side in an instant, its powerful jaws snapping shut around one of the assassins and crushing it with a single bite. Throwing the assassin like a chewed-up toy across the hallway, Lycaon then lunged at the next assassin, crushing it under its paw before sending another flying through the air like a bullet. Two more assassins and a group of knights tried to attack, but Lycaon snarled as it shifted its attention to them, its streamlined form shimmering with a dark, flame-like aura. With a guttural growl, Lycaon opened its mouth and unleashed a torrent of blazing black flame, engulfing the assassins and the advancing knights in an inferno that consumed their mechanical bodies, reducing them to nothing but molten metal and ashes. Issei, this is... An overwhelmed Rias found herself uttering in utter shock and bewilderment as she stared at the massive wolf that stood protectively in front of her while snarling at the remaining enemies. Her gaze then shifted to Issei as he walked to her side and yanked his sword out of the wall, being left speechless when three more wolves, smaller in size compared to Lycaon, came out of his shadow and gathered around them. "You three, stay back and protect my master," Issei commanded, twirling the Ironbane longsword in his hand as he addressed the earthen, fire, and water wolves, making the three growl in acknowledgement before moving in front of Rias. "And no, take them with you as well, Issei. Even with Lycaon, you can't possibly be thinking about taking all of them on." Rias shouted to Issei, who walked confidently ahead with Lycaon at his side, even as more knights flooded into the hall and formed a battalion in front of him. "The rest of you, with me. Your own." Rias trailed off, left. Completely speechless as more wolves emerged from Issei's extended shadow and bared their enemies ahead. Swinging his sword down, Issei stabbed the weapon into the stone floor and turned back to give Rias an assuring smile. "If you want to help, do it from behind these wolves. They will keep you safe. Notice. Accept Rias Gremory to your party? Y/N. Confirm yes." With that confirmation to the system, making a second window with Rias' portrait, HP, MP and her current level under his own portrait, Issei then turned back to face the enemies, casting his gaze momentarily to the pieces of armors that lay scattered on the floor before speaking up the command. "Arise." If Rias had been shocked before, then the feeling that followed as she watched the scene playing out before her was a level beyond anything she had experienced. Tendrils of darkness rose from the fallen Magitech knights on Issei's command, their forms taking shape as shadowy versions of their former selves as they burst forth from their crumbled husks. Slowly, these spectral figures rose to their feet, joining the wolves around Issei with glowing eyes and weapons at the ready as they faced their former comrades, now ready to fight alongside their new master in the upcoming fight. Magitech Trooper LV-1, rank, Common, Magitech Assassin LV-1, rank, Common, Magitech Berserker LV-1, rank, Elite. All troops. Charge. With a reverberating howl from Lycaon, Issei led the assault with his strongest shadow at his side, its massive frame surging forward like a thunderbolt while the other shadow wolves and troopers ran right behind them as they charged the battalion of knights. However, it was the lightning and wind wolves that barreled through the front line of the enemies first with their elemental powers. While the lightning wolf moved like a lightning bolt, darting between the knights and discharging bolts of electricity that sent sparks flying, metal convulsing. The wind wolf created powerful gales that hurled knights into the air and crashing into each other. Before the enemies could recover, Lycaon tore right through them, its giant, streamlined form crashing into the front lines and crushing several Magitech knights. With enemy formation in disarray under its overwhelming power, the rest of the Shadow Troopers and Carnies surged forward to capitalize on the breach, causing the battlefield to explode into a chaotic clash of steels and brawl of metals, with the clanks of metal reverberating through the hull. Issei charged into the fray alongside his shadow soldiers, the Ironbane longsword flashing in his hand as he cut through one Magitech knight after another while Rias assisted him and his shadows from behind the battle using her demonic power. At the same time, assassins tried to move through the battlefield in their camouflages to reach both Issei and Rias, but they were sniffed out quickly by the other shadow wolves, who immediately tackled them and wrestled them down to tear them apart with their fangs and claws. Notice, level up. Level 25 Dragonsworn / Level 3 Shadow Monarch. 30 levels accumulated, boosted gear LV4, unlocked. The player now has access to boosted gear's balance breaker. Balance breaker? Issei thought as he glanced briefly at the notification on the window next to him, knowing exactly what it was but decided to leave it for later. More importantly, he was leveling up quickly, even with Rias benefiting from a percentage of his EXP gain each time she eliminated an enemy as a party member. His troops, too, were growing stronger, albeit at a slower pace despite gaining the same amount of EXP as he was, with Lycaon having only gained a single level so far despite how many knights they had killed. MP, 1839/1975. However, what Issei noticed most was the rapid depletion of his mana, though he had no problem realizing that the MP he was exhausting was being automatically used to heal his shadows, who were taking as much damage from the Magitech knights as they were dealing. Despite this, the drain rate wasn't too bad, and Issei felt reassured knowing that as long as he had the mana to sustain them, his shadows would remain in the fight as long as he didn't let it drag on until his mana was completely exhausted. The battle raged on, and as the minutes ticked by, the tide started to turn into the favor of the devils and shadow. The seemingly endless wave of Magitech knights marching into the room finally started to dwindle, allowing Issei and his shadows to dispatch the remaining enemies until the last of them was defeated by Lycaon. Resting his sword on his shoulder, Issei surveyed the area. The battle had been easier than he had expected, but then again, he had come well prepared with the Ironbane longsword, but above all he had his shadows and Rias with him. Without them, the battle would surely have been much more difficult, having to fight all those knights alone. As Issei continued to look around, he soon noticed a small object emitting a faint glow, partially buried in the stone floor amidst the shattered pieces of armor and debris. He knelt down, brushing away the armor and rubble to reveal what looked like a stone the size of his palm, its surface etched with a strange symbol that were emitting the glow. With his curiosity piqued, Issei reached down and picked up the stone, feeling a surge of energy from it as a system window appeared beside the item. Rune, Camouflage, Category, Rune Stone, Rarity, D. Break the rune to learn the skill. Oh, this must be a rune stone, and it has that skill of those assassins. Issei thought in awe as he looked at the item in his hand. It was his first time seeing a rune stone, which could be broken to grant the user the unique skill it contained. Supposedly, anyone could use it, regardless of whether they were devils, fallen angels, or even powerless humans. The ability or spell from the rune stone would still be granted if used, which was one of the reasons they normally cost a fortune, aside from their rarity. Then, a realization struck Issei. His eyes widened as an idea came to his mind while he recalled the details about rune stones from the files Aquino had compiled for him. If he played it correctly, then he wouldn't have to hide his shadows anymore. Issei, is that a rune stone? This is my second time seeing one in real life. Rias said, her voice tinged with curiosity as she approached him from behind, flanked by the 3 shadow wolves he had assigned to protect her. Smiling, Issei stood up and turned to face her, nodding as he turned his gaze down to the item in his hand. Yeah. I've been discovering rune stones like this in the gates I've raided. Issei said, though it was a blatant lie. He hated lying, especially to his friends and those close to him, but at the same time, Issei didn't know any other way that he could sell it better so he could have his shadows around outside of instance dungeons. Really? Rias gasped in surprise, you're so lucky, Issei. How many have you found? Well, about a handful or so. Issei said, scratching his cheek with an awkward smile, not feeling entirely sure if he should have said that much. Luckily, Rias didn't notice his discomfort as she turned her attention to the shadow wolves and troopers. What you did there back there? Was it a skill you obtained from one of those rune stones you found? Rias asked unsurely, but Issei found himself quickly nodding his head in response. I think it's a necromancer skill of sorts, but instead of using the corpses of the enemies I've defeated. It seems I extract their shadows and turn them into my minions instead. That, however, was the truth. Really? That's incredible, Issei. Rias gasped as she turned her gaze between the shadow troopers and the wolves. Since these shadow knights are from here, does that mean you got the wolves from the previous gate? Just how long can you keep them around? And how many can you have? I actually have no idea, actually. Issei answered while scratching the back of his head. Those were the questions he had asked himself too. Although the number of shadows he could extract increased with his level, it was only recently that he discovered it. As for how long he could keep them around, obviously since they stayed in the fight for as long as he had mana, the answer for that question must be for as long as he lived, even if he didn't use them. Before he could speak more, Rias hit his arm with the palm of her hand, causing Issei to turn to her to see her looking at him disapprovingly. And what were you thinking trying to raid another gate in the middle of the night like this, Issei? Didn't Grafia already tell you how dangerous it is? She then brought out the device she had been holding earlier and showed it to him with a finger pointing at the screen, which displayed some big number. And look at this. This number means this gate has to be at least high C to low B in ranking. Oh. I read that B ranks gates is about high class. Does that mean I have gotten quite strong? Issei asked with a grin, holding up his fists with his shadows cheering him on. The troopers and assassins clapped, while the berserkers pumped their fists in the air to him, and the wolves barked in approval. That's not my point. Rias reasoned, but she didn't push further because she knew Issei was right. She had seen the way he handled those monster knights, with his shadows negating any number disadvantage that he had. From the look of it, they couldn't die either, and since they were extracted from slain enemies, Issei's army would only grow larger as the battle raged on. Such was always the case with necromancers. What a terrifying skill. That rune stone that he had given him that skill, it had to be at least S rank in rarity, or maybe even an undetermined class above. How he managed to find something like that in a low-ranking gate was the real question that was bugging her. Could it be that those gates that he raided himself had higher rankings than she and Grafia had thought? Regardless, let's get out of here. Rias said as she grabbed his arm, signaling him to follow her with a light tug. This gate is still far too dangerous for us to continue to linger here. As soon as we are outside I will call. But Issei didn't move from his spot, even as Rias pulled on his arm. Closing his eyes for a moment, Issei then spoke to his master, with a smile that showed her his confidence. There's no need. We will clear this gate, Bucho, by beating the boss ourselves. Issei, you can't be. I'm very serious, Bucho. I intend to fight this boss, and test my skills against it. You can sit it out if you want, in fact, I think you should sit it out. I have a feeling whatever is waiting for us beyond that door. Issei then turned his attention to the massive double doors at the end of the entrance hall, which no doubt led to a throne room of some sort. Before, they were hidden in the darkness, but after all the Magitech knights had been defeated, the torches leading to them had been lit, signaling that it was time for him to face the boss. it will not let you cast your spell, and you're not trained enough to avoid their attacks. Rias looked like she wanted to argue, but immediately bit her bottom lip to stop herself, because, deep down, she knew Issei was right. She had almost been killed by those assassins, and the sight of her own reflection in their swords still left her pretty shaken. That had to be the closest she had ever been to dying. If it weren't for Issei and his wolf, YagamiNguyen, she would have been long dead on the floor. "Hey, troopers, you guys spread out and start collecting the loot here, see if you can find anything valuable." Issei gave the command to his new shadows, who all bowed their heads to him before heading off to do what they were told. "And you three entertain YagamiNguyen and the wolves, play catch with them or something." He instructed the three Magitech berserkers, who pointed at themselves before turning to the wolves, who were all looking at them in expectance. With that, Issei turned back to Rias and looked at her, seeing her biting the nail of her thumb as she looked around them. Maybe he shouldn't have said all that, but then again, what he was about to say would surely hurt her more, having decided to speak to her about what had been in his mind about their training. It's only the matter of whether or not he could make it sound better. "And there's also something I want to talk to you about." Issei started, choosing his words very carefully, "Our training. While I'm grateful that you and everyone are helping me in Asia get stronger, I can't help but think that it's not enough." "What do you mean, Issei?" Rias asked. "We're doing what we can, Issei. We're training you and Asia because we need you both to be strong enough for the—" "Exactly, Bucho. You're training us, but who's training you and everyone else?" Issei interrupted, meeting her gaze steadily. "We have 7 days to train, and it's been 3 days already. What I've noticed is what you guys are trying to do is to get me and Asia up to your level, and I really appreciate that. But what about you, or Akino-san, or Kiba, or Kaneko-chan?" He paused for a moment, his expression serious. "Moreover," Razor said it himself, "Akino-san is the only one in our peerage who can fight on par with his servants. Can we really win if we can add 2 more to the equation, and I'm not even considering the fact that Asia cannot fight. Do you know why I'm out here tonight? Why have I been training so hard?" Issei asked, "Because I want to make sure that we will win. I want to beat Razor so that you're free from the marriage with him, so you can smile again and choose to be with whoever you want, but I cannot do that at this rate. Every day, I learn new things from you, Kiba, Kaneko-chan, and Akino-san, but I don't get to push myself, to test and hone my new skills against opponents that try to take my life instead of leaving me with some bruises. That's why when I found this gate, I decided to enter it. I don't care if Grafia-san finds out and comes for me to give me a spanking either. I just want us to win." He finished, speaking the last few words very clearly so that Rias could understand what he meant. "Issei." Rias whispered, her voice barely audible as she listened intently, her eyes softening as Issei spoke. She could see the determination in his eyes and the sincerity behind his words. "I know you care about all of us, Bucho, not just me, but do you really want me to shoulder this task alone?" Issei asked, his tone softening as he smiled at her. "I don't doubt that you and everyone else would want the satisfaction of beating Razor yourselves. I can do it for you if you want, Bucho. Hell, there's a chance that I'd beat his entire peerage as well with the boys here." As he said that, he pointed his thumbs as his shadows, making the troopers wave back at him, making Issei and Rias sweat drop. Still, the sight of them working diligently while seemingly arguing with one another what they should bring back to their master helped ease the tension a little. Coughing into his hand, Issei then turned back to his master and continued, "I guess the real question is, do you want me to hog all the glory of wiping that smug look off his face, or do you want to do that yourself?" "Of course, I want to. When he threatened you and the others, I wanted nothing more than to blow him to nothing myself," Rias declared with conviction, making Issei smile at her. Her expression then softened as she continued, "But I guess you're right. We've been so focused on training you and Asia that we've forgotten to push ourselves. Plus, I have to admit my own blame in this. I thought we could beat Razor, but that was just my ego and confidence talking. If we want to beat the Phoenix for sure, then all of us need to become stronger, not just you, or Asia. Tomorrow will be a new day for us, so let us head back to the villa, call the authority, get some sleep and, we're not leaving, are we? Rias asked with a deadpan expression, and Issei only responded to his master with a grin as he turned his attention to the loot his shadow troopers had managed to collect. Most items that were collected from high-level gates could fetch a decent amount of money. Rias said she could help him sell them, so he decided to let her keep it. You're not gonna extract the shadows of these knights, Issei? Rias asked as she looked at pieces of armor the shadow troopers were carrying as they lined up in front of so she could assess which items were worth selling and which were essentially trash. She appeared to have a good eye for this, as the items she deemed worthless didn't fetch much gold in the system shop either. Nah, I have my eyes set on a bigger prize up there, Bucho. Issei asked as he pointed his thumb at the double doors, making Rias widen her eyes in realization. Shocked, Rias looked over to YagamiNguyen, who was watching some of the wolves play catch with the shadow berserkers, and asked. Wait, does that mean YagamiNguyen is a boss? Yeah. Rias gulped nervously. After everything had been looted and Issei gave a thumbs up to his shadow troopers, he and Rias slowly approached the double doors at the end of the entrance hall. An ominous presence emanated from within as Issei pushed the doors open with both hands. The interior was pitch black at first, but just like after the Magitech Knights had been defeated, the wall-mounted torches around the room lit up, illuminating the space and revealing the figure standing in the center of the chamber. Even at first glance, Issei could feel an overwhelming presence coming from the imposing figure. His armors were thick, yet at the same time it was streamlined, with pauldrons on both shoulders in the shape resembling that of the heads of lions. The helmet bore sharp, angular features, with two horn-like protrusions curving upwards, giving the figure an almost demonic appearance. The visor was a narrow slit, almost fully concealing the face of whatever being resided within. A thick, tattered cloak of deep crimson hung from his waist, splitting down the middle and draping down to the floor like blood-stained banners, contrasting starkly with the dark metal of the armor. Gripped tightly in its metal gauntlets and being held in front of him was a massive, double-edged sword with red runes running down the surface, with the blade being half as long as the figure, who stood imposingly tall himself. The edges of the blade gleamed menacingly, looking to be sharp enough to slice through steel like butter. Magitech General Glocka, LV-40. Issei. Rias whispered unsurely, and Issei could feel her shaking behind him at the terrifying aura that the Magitech General was emitting. Bucho, stay back. Remember our deal. Issei said in a low tone with a bead of sweat trickling down the side of his face. His only hope was that the Magitech General wouldn't be interested enough in Rias to shift his attention to his master, who immediately rushed to the side of the throne room and hid behind a pillar, with YagamiNguyen and several shadow troopers following to protect her as they had been told to do so beforehand. As much as she wanted to assist Issei, Rias instantly had the feeling that she would only get in his way against an opponent like that. Drag, let's give it our all from the start. Issei spoke to his heavenly dragon partner as he steeled his nerves and marched toward General Glocka, whose gaze he could feel was on him the moment he was close enough. Putting his sword behind his back using a handmade sheath that he had made using the leftover from the Magitech Knights, Issei then summoned his boosted gear, and activated the new feature that he had unlocked with its 4th level. Understood, partner. Boost. Over booster. In that moment as the green jewel of his metal gauntlet shone, with Drag making the announcement himself instead of letting the sacred gear do it like usual in his voice, Issei felt a surge of power unlike anything he had ever felt before surged through him, with his status window showing that his stats and attribute were rising off the chart. An intense, powerful aura of red demonic energy erupted violently from him like a hurricane, swirling and expanding with ferocious energy. The aura matched the overwhelming presence of the dungeon boss, who remained steadfast and unmoving in the center of the room, his imposing figure silhouetted against the fiery glow. Ultimate activated, Welsh Dragon Balance Breaker, LV-1. HP plus 2500, MP plus 500, Def plus 150. The 10 seconds time limit has been removed. The power of the weapon stored inside the armors will be continuously boosted whenever the player uses doubling on themselves. All damage done will be increased. Devil wings will be replaced by dragon wings. Packed resonance. 1. Additional status, plus 75 to all attributes. 2. Draconic aura, reduces damage taken and enhances resistance to elemental attacks corresponding to the element of the current pact. Welsh Dragon Balance Breaker. With another announcement, the hurricane of red demonic dispersed with a sharp gust of wind, revealing in his balance breaker. Boosted gear scale. Hold on, what is this? The metal gauntlet on his left arm had changed significantly, extending up to his shoulder and enveloping the entire limb in a sleek, dark red armor. The rest of his body, however, remained mostly unarmored, save for the single pauldron with gold accents on his right shoulder, to which the Ironbane sword was strapped. Additionally, the intense aura that had flared from him earlier persisted, though now it radiated more gently, akin to the flickering flames of the torches on the walls. Is this it? Issei asked in his mind. He did feel a whole lot stronger, but at the same time, he had expected a lot more. Of course this is not it. How strange. In the past, the balance breaker of boosted gear manifests as a full suit of scale mail armor. Most if not all the balance breakers of dragon-based sacred gears are like that. Drake answered, his voice telling Issei that his partner also didn't know what was going on either. Could it be, that it has evolved into a subspecies? And this form is also a level 1. What should be its name now, then? We can worry about that later, Drake. Issei said and drew his Ironbane sword, swinging it down to hold it at his side. To his surprise, the pauldron on his right shoulder then broke into parts, which snapped to his right arm to reconfigure themselves into a second gauntlet identical to the one on the left. Okay, now this is more like it. Oh wait, maybe I should have kept it there and drawn it later. No matter. Bracing himself, Issei then turned his gaze to Glocka, who only then finally made his move. In a swift motion, the Magitech general lifted his sword with one hand and swung it around with such force that Issei felt a pressure so intense it could have cleaved him in half even from a distance. Bringing the blade back down, Glocka then took a stance with the tip of his blade pointed directly at Issei, who also readied himself with the Ironbane longsword. Guess you will make a badass commander for my shadow troops. The question here is if I can make you submit. Issei murmured. Monster or not, Glocka showed class. Make me proud, boys. At that, the rest of his shadow troopers, berserkers and wolves burst forth from his shadow, charging toward Glocka with a series of battle cries and roars. The shadowy figures lunged at the Magitech general from all directions. Issei watched with anticipation, hoping that the combined assault of his shadow troops was enough to give him a glimpse of what he was dealing with. And just as he had anticipated, Glocka was unfazed by the shadows, despite them overwhelming him by dozens to one. With a single, sweeping, lightning-fast motion of his broadsword, he cut through the advancing shadow berserkers and wolves, their forms dissipating into wisps of dark smoke as the area around him exploded, sending rocks and debris into the air. The assassins used that opportunity to sneak up on him, but Glocka spun around and cleaved through the assassins before they could do anything, his swords moving in a blur as he hacked them to pieces, leaving them in shadowy fragments that took a longer time to regenerate. One remaining assassin attempted to sneak up on Glocka from the side, but before it could deliver a fatal blow, the Magitech general shot his hand out and grabbed the shadow assassin by the head, lifting it into the air. Keeping his gaze on Issei the whole time while the assassin struggled to break free in his iron grip, he crushed the shadow by just clenching his fist, shattering its helmet and breaking its skull before dropping it on the floor of the throne room. Come back. Issei commanded, knowing that he would just be wasting mana at this point. He doubted even YagamiNguyen stood a chance against this knight. Skill activated, Sprint. With that, Issei shot toward Glocka with a burst of speed, moving faster than he had ever done before with the speed of his balance breaker combined with the skill sprint, closing the distance between him and General Glocka in a blink of an eye. With the Ironbane longsword in his hand, Issei swung it at the towering knight with everything he had, leaving a faint, silvery arc in the air as it sliced through the air. At the same time, Glocka raised his own weapon to meet the strike. In an instant, the blade of the Ironbane longsword shattered into a million pieces upon colliding with the general's broadsword, filling the air between the two combatants with a shower of shards. Issei, however, had anticipated the destruction of his blade from the start, having suspected that a level 10 longsword with a B-rank rarity might not match the power of whatever weapon the Magitech general wielded. That was 25,000 G down the drain, but if he could defeat this boss, then he would get rewards worth more than any gold. Boost! 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 Ducking down to avoid a wide swing from the massive broadsword as Glocka slashed his weapon horizontally, ignoring the destruction that the sheer force behind the attack caused behind him, Issei clenched his fists and delivered a powerful left hook to the side of the general's helmet with the full force of his empowered might by the balance breaker, its power further doubled 4 times in a row. The blow generated a shockwave that reverberated throughout the throne room, but Glocka only staggered back a single step. His eyes, or whatever that Issei saw under that dark visor of his helmet, gleamed dangerously as he retaliated with a deadly move, which Issei managed to narrowly avoid the attack by sidestepping just in time. Rias held her breath as she tried to perceive the insanely fast-paced duel. Issei remained agile on his feet, dodging and weaving through Glocka's relentless strikes with his broadsword. Each time Glocka swung his weapon it was with such force that the air seemed to distort around the blade, leaving deep gouges in the floor where it missed its mark, but Issei did not falter, countering the attacks with a series of punches, with each blow having its power doubled continuously by his balance breaker. Boost! Boost! Still, no matter how fast he moved and how much harder he hit with each boost, Glocka seemed to have no trouble matching him with his own speed, while his armor seemed to absorb the force behind each blow. Issei had no idea if the armor was that durable or not, but each time he struck the chest piece, he could have sworn that the dents he left on the part just vanished only a brief moment after, as if it had never been inflicted. Boost! 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 Before Issei could try one more time, this time with the penetrate skill, Glocka slashed his sword at Issei, aiming to cleave him in two. Seeing that he could not dodge, Issei blocked the blow with both his gauntlets, but the force of the strike still sent him skidding back until he managed to regain his ground. Another swift, vertical slash came next as Glocka descended upon him, but Issei twisted his body in a practiced motion, a move that Kaneko had shown him, narrowly avoiding the blow before using the momentum to deliver a roundhouse kick to aim at the side of the general's helmet. To his surprise, Glocka just shot his free hand up and grabbed his ankle, his head tilting a little to the side as if he was unimpressed by what Issei was showing. Before Issei could react, the general had stabbed his sword down and pulled him into the air to kick him on his side, sending him rocketing across the throne room faster than Issei himself could have done it himself. Rias covered her mouth and stared in horror as Issei collided with the wall above the throne in an explosion of rock and debris, with Issei falling down only a moment later with BLD trickling down the side of his face. HP, 5972/8005. MP, 2050/2350. Before Issei could even touch the ground, Glocka appeared in front of him and grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, twisting around to build up the momentum before throwing him into the floor below. Not letting Issei even a moment to recover, the Magitech general shot down and threw a series of earth-shaking blows at him with his fists. Each strike was a devastating display of strength, blowing up the area around him as the force of his attacks reverberated through the throne room and caused the floor itself to tremble. Then, the knight stopped and held his hand out, causing his sword to remove itself from the floor to fly into his hand for a final sword strike. Despite the shadow troopers holding her back just as their master had told them to no matter what, Rias tried to rush in to help Issei as Glocka raised his sword over his head before swinging it down. HP, 3972/8005. MP, 2050/2350. Boost. 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 Before the blade could meet its mark, Issei shot his hand up and grabbed it, halting the swing with all of his might while BLD trickled down the sides of his head. The green jewel of his left gauntlet shone brightly as he boosted numerous times before shooting himself up to throw his fist, empowered with the skill penetrate, into Glocka's chest with a fierce cry, punching him with such force that the Magitech general was sent hurling back, crashing into the far wall with a thunderous impact. Skill activated, penetrate. Issei stood amidst the debris, his breath ragged and his body aching in pain, but his eyes remained locked on Glocka, burning with determination. Despite the force of the blow the Sekyudai had given him, the Magitech general emerged from the hole he had created upon colliding with the wall only a moment later, with his broken breastplate quickly mending itself back together. Issei. It's the sword. Rias shouted to him from behind the shadow troopers, the sword is healing him. Heh, so that is your trick. Issei smirked as he wiped the block from the corner of his mouth with the back of his gauntlet, his eyes widening when Glocka suddenly turned his attention to Rias. Oh no you don't. As the Magitech general charged at the crimson-haired devil, YagamiNguyen threw himself at him in his lightning form, while the shadow troopers raised their weapons and formed a protective formation in front of the heiress. Glocka met YagamiNguyen in a thunderous clash, one that sent the shadow wolf hurling back with a pained yelp as Glocka proved himself to be superior. Boost. Boost. Skill activated, penetrate. MP, 1320/2350. Still, the elemental Carney had done its job well. The brief moment that YagamiNguyen was able to halt Glocka in his tracks was all Issei needed, using not just his speed, but his dragon wings that had replaced his devil wings in his balance breaker. In an instant he was able to close the distance between them, and time seemed to slow down as Issei cocked his fist back, wasting no time after he had activated another penetrate to deliver a powerful uppercut that launched Glocka into the air, crashing into the ceiling above him. Dust and debris rained down as the general was embedded into the stone, but Issei didn't waste even a second to take off. With a flap of his wings, he shot upward like a missile, slamming himself into Glocka with a direct blow to the face before grabbing his sword arm with both arms, feeling the immense weight of the Magitech general's strength pushing back against him. Planting one foot firmly against Glocka's chest while keeping them both hanging upside down from the ceiling, Issei gritted his teeth and yanked hard, his muscles straining as he poured every ounce of his power into the effort. Boost. 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 MP, 1160/2350. Boosting himself up more than he had ever done before, Issei tore Glocka's arm from his shoulder with a fierce cry, leaving the broadsword to fall freely toward the ground. YagamiNguyen. The shadow wolf, having recovered from the earlier clash, immediately leaped into the air and clamped down on the hilt of the weapon with his jaws, keeping it away from the Magitech general as he landed on the floor and darted over to the other side of the throne room. Glocka tried to retrieve it with his telekinesis power, but YagamiNguyen bit down even harder, holding the sword firm between his fangs. Still, the Magitech general was far from defeated. Even with just one arm, his strength remained a force to be reckoned with. With an inhuman roar, the first sound that he made the entire fight, he swung his remaining fist at Issei, catching him square in the jaw. The impact sent Issei reeling, but he quickly recovered, retaliating with a powerful punch of his own. The two warriors brawled furiously in midair, trading blows with enough force to shatter stone and shake the very foundation of the throne room until they crashed into the stone floor. Skill activated, penetrate. Boost. HP, 3272/8005, MP, 1000/2350. Skill activated, penetrate, boost. HP, 2872/8005, MP, 840/2350. Skill activated, penetrate, boost. HP, 2072/8005. MP, 360/2350. As the smoke started to clear, the two could be seen engaging in an all-out, savage brawl. There were no techniques, no refined moves, just raw, brutal punches with everything they had. They traded blow for blow, even headbutts, but as the brawl wore on, it was Issei who could still hit harder and harder thanks to boosted gear, even as his body grew heavier and heavier with each boost, the sign that he had reached his limit of how much power his body could currently handle. Glocka, meanwhile, looked to be at his limit. He could still hit hard enough to make Issei want to close his eyes and pass out with each punch to the face, but it was clear that each and every directed blow to his body had started to weaken him and wear down his stamina and endurance. When Glocka launched another powerful punch, Issei ducked beneath it and immediately countered with a devastating uppercut to the Magitech General's helmet. The impact lifted Glocka off his feet, and Issei followed up with a series of strikes, each one enhanced by his boosted gear and fueled by penetrate. His fists slammed into Glocka's armor, denting it and sending shockwaves through his armored form before finally, with one last mighty blow, boosting himself up one last time with the remaining mana that he had left, Issei drove his left dragon gauntlet into Glocka's chest, shattering the armor and sending the general crashing into the wall behind him with a thunderous impact. The force of the collision cratered the wall, leaving spiderweb cracks and a large hole where Glocka was. With a heavy clang, the Magitech General fell to the ground and remained there with his head hanging, white blood trickling from the tiny gaps in his helmet as his once imposing form now lay broken and defeated. Magitech General Glocka LV 40, defeated. Notice, level up. Notice, level up. Issei. Rias shouted as she rushed to Issei's side just as he collapsed to his knees. His second gauntlet vanished as the balance breaker deactivated, lifting a huge weight off his body and allowing Issei to let out a sigh of relief between quick, shallow breaths. "I'm okay. I'm okay," Issei said quickly, holding his hand out to Rias as she kneeled down next to him and tried to use a healing spell to make him feel better. Both his HP and MP had reached critical level, but the increases from repeated level up had restored a decent amount, enough to keep him standing on his feet. Still, his body was hurting all over, but there's nothing that his dragon's physiology couldn't fix with a good sleep later. "See? I told you I could do it." That was. But Rias stopped, not knowing whether she should praise him, or berate him for being that reckless. In the end, she decided to hug him instead, wrapping her arms gently around his neck and bringing herself to Issei, who winced a little but smiled as he leaned into her embrace, with one hand resting on her arm. "Target is eligible for shadow extraction. Hey, Bucho, can you help me go to him? My body feels so heavy right now," Issei requested, and Rias nodded her head in response before slowly helping him up, helping him over to stand Glocka. Before reaching the fallen general, Issei glanced at his shadows, who had followed closely behind. "Good work, YagamiNguyen. You guys too," he praised, acknowledging his wolf and shadow troopers, who threw their hands into the air to celebrate, looking delighted even though they particularly didn't do anything. Still, seeing YagamiNguyen with a sword in his mouth, it gave Issei an idea. If the wolf was up for it. "Alright, then," Issei said, as she turned his attention back to the fallen Magitech General, who lay completely still before him and Rias. To say that Glocka outmatched him in almost every aspect was an understatement. If it weren't for his boosted gear and its balance breaker, which had lived up to his name in that moment and allowed him to boost himself up continuously, then Glocka would have beaten him the moment the fight started. It was also thanks to Rias realizing that Glocka's sword had been healing him throughout the battle that they managed to turn the tide. He really needed to learn how to perceive the flow of magic like her, something that he couldn't see even with his high perception and observe. Maybe he should ask Akino to teach him, since it had been stated before that she was particularly skilled in reading different kinds of energy flows. But on to the problem at hand. Was he even high level enough to extract his shadow? Issei had no idea. As he studied the general, Issei noticed a handful of items falling on the floor near his hands. You have received the following items. Magitech General's Helmet. Rune Stone, Ruler's Hands. Leather Pouch. Instant Teleportation Stone X1. This must be the boss loots that they mentioned. Rias said in amazement as she bent down and picked up the items for Issei. This helmet is a top-tier item. How can you tell that, exactly? Issei couldn't help but ask as Rias handed him the helmet. She was right. Not only the item, identical to the helmet that Glocka was still wearing, was S rank in rarity, but it also had a 15% damage reduction passive and a whole bunch of bonus stats into his attributes. The Grimoire has multiple shops crafting and selling these items in the underworld, called the Crimson Emporium. We're actually one of the most famous providers of gate items and gears. I also had a hobby of reading and researching this stuff back in the day. Rias answered with an awkward laugh before coughing into her hand and shifting her attention to the leather pouch while Issei raised an eyebrow at what she just said. No wonder why she said she could help him sell the loot. What do you think is inside? Rias asked while lifting the pouch up and down as if testing its weight and feeling out what could be inside. How about we open it? Issei suggested with a curious grin. Rias nodded and pulled on the string that kept the pouch tightly closed. However, the moment the fabric loosened with a slight rustle, the content inside seemingly disappeared, with Rias even turning the pouch upside down, shaking it gently, expecting something to fall out. Now that is disappoint. You okay, Issei? Rias turned to Issei to ask when he suddenly choked. I'm okay, just, disappointed, that's all. I was hoping for another cool item. He said. In truth, however, he was excited, more excited than he had ever been before. Fund, 1 million, G. Because the moment Rias opened that pouch for him, 1 million gold was added to his inventory. That's basically 10 times more money than he had ever had. Well, I guess another rune stone and this rare teleportation stone more than make up for it. Rias said with a smile as she handed him the rune stone of Ruler's Hands. Judging by its name, Issei had a feeling it was the rune stone for that telekinesis ability that Glocka used. You're so lucky, Issei. Most devils who specialize in raiding would be immensely lucky to find a second rune stone in their whole career, yet you found 2 already just in this gate already. Why yeah, must be the luck of a dragon, Issei chuckled nervously while scratching his cheek. I mean, dragons like treasures, right? They must be attracted to me or something. Oh, that might be it, I see. Rias gasped, nodding her head. Heh, gotta tip my hat to you for that quick thinking, partner, if I had one. Drake said, sounding rather impressed. Now, on to the real loot. Issei said as he put the 2 stones into his pockets. He couldn't just store them in his inventory with Rias around, even though he could have sold it as another ability he got from a rune stone. The method of storing items into his inventory was different from using a storage spell, which he hadn't bothered to learn since he had the system inventory. Arise. Issei held his hand out toward Magitech General Glocka, palm facing toward him, and spoke the command, causing shadowy mist to erupt from the night and swipe at them, swirling with such intensity that Issei nearly lost his footing if not for Rias continuing to support him. When it finally stopped, Issei widened his eyes in surprise as the general remained still, with only a notification hovering next to his corpse. Failed to extract the shadow, remaining attempt February 3rd. So I can fail to extract that shadow of something this strong. Issei said, steeling himself for another attempt. Arise. He spoke the command once more, this time louder and more forceful. The shadows erupted again, this time even more violently, but once the mist cleared, the notification remained unchanged. Failed to extract the shadow, remaining attempts 1/3. This shadow is stubborn. The Security found himself cursing out loudly. He had one more try. It would be such a waste if he couldn't revive Glocka. He was such a powerful and formidable opponent. Could it be that he doesn't want to serve you yet, Issei? Rias suddenly asked, making Issei turn to look at her in surprise. That duel you two had, maybe he's still not convinced. Maybe he's looking for another quality in you other than just your strength. Issei found himself softening his gaze as he listened to Rias. Turning his focus back to the fallen Magitech general, he let a small smile across his face. His eyes briefly glanced over to the empty throne on the other side of the room. The duel had ravaged the entire place, yet the throne remained the only thing untouched. Whoever sat on that throne, that person is gone now. They don't need your protection anymore. Issei began, but your strength and loyalty still have value. Pledge your sword and your loyalty to me, General. Show me your worth beyond whatever past that you have, and together, we will rise stronger than ever before. Arise. With that command, another wave of shadowy mist erupted from the fallen Magitech general, but this time, a shadowy hand also burst forth from his armored husk. The mist swirled toward him and obscured his vision, and for a brief moment, the world around Issei went pitch black, with Rias disappearing. He could still feel her arms around him while his left rested on her shoulder, but she was no longer there next to him. And then, the figure emerged, the same figure who had told Issei to grow stronger, because his duty, his burden would soon be his. He had a smile on his face, and a hand in his pocket as he looked at Issei, who found himself gazing back before noticing an armored figure that emerged at his side. This new figure, noticeably different from the axe-wielding one from before, was a tall, imposing knight with a light purple glow. His jet-black armor covered him from head to toe, complemented by a tattered black cape. A scar ran down the left side of his helmet, and a long, red hair-like ornament extended from the back of his headgear. The knight then threw his cape out and enveloped the other young man, making him disappear as he reached around and placed his hand on his chest to bow his head slowly to Issei, who widened his eyes in surprise as he heard his voice echoing in his mind. The sword of my disciple is now yours. Go to your new liege, Lieutenant. And with that, the knight faded away, with the world around his returning to normal and the shadow of General Glocka, whose form was now pitch black with only the inside of his waist cloaks retaining its color, fully emerging from his fallen husk, extending his hand out to recall his broadsword from Lycaon. As the blade flew into his hand, making Rias step back cautiously, the knight then swung it around with both hands holding the grip and stabbed it down the floor to get down on knee and bow his head to Issei. Shadow extraction successful. I think you would want a new name too, like Lycaon. Issei said with a small smile as he looked at the general, his mind racing to come up with the best name for his newest shadow, who lowered his head in expectation. How about Gladio? Gladio LV.10. Rank, Knight. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 6. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author YagamiNguyen on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.